Mr. Southern.
Yes, Dr. Oyster. The reason we had these magnet schools is what has been said. We wanted to make sure we got some schools that had more student population. Why did we come up, what does choice enable us to do? Define choice for us and what it does for us.
Choice, I think what it does for our community. Time's up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll extend I have 2 more speakers. I'll extend for another 10 minutes.
But Seth, I think what choice does for us is it provides to our parents and our community the opportunity for parents to select the school that they believe is the best fit for their child. And that decision might be programmatic. Quite often, and quite honestly, a lot of times it is a decision of convenience. It has to do with perhaps after-school care. It may have to do with where the travel pattern of the parent, where they might work, where they might live, where another family member might live. It has a lot of components as to why people choose certain schools. And I think that people are always better served when they can choose where they want to go. And if we can allow that choice to the greatest extent possible, I think people are more satisfied with where they are. And when they are more satisfied, they seem to do better. And I think that's just in general terms. So we're very much in favor of as much choice as we can possibly have. Now, every time you make a decision to allow choice, there are certain parameters. The building will only hold so many. If you add extra programs and those programs require additional personnel, that's another cost. All those are things that are drivers behind why we need the board to give us direction. This is where we want to go. This is what we see as choice. Because right now, choice means a lot of things to a lot of people. I've heard this afternoon, as I know you have as well. Well, choice means don't touch the magnets. Choice means do away with the magnets. Choice means to put one of the primary programs we have in every community. Choice might mean leaving space for 10% or 15% of the students to come and choose to be in that school. Every one of those things I just said that was brought forth, was entertained as an idea, was brought up as a question or a concern, all of those things require resources. They require space or personnel or a method by which to get people there. And if we don't have widespread opportunity for choice for a lot of people, if we don't provide transportation to it, they really don't have an option to exercise that choice. So there are all these factors that I think you have to consider. So there is not this single path forward for choice unless we're simply going to say, for every place there's a space available, we'll let you choose to go there. That's why we need a more consensus-based, formal direction from the board as to what choice looks like.
Are we looking, Dr. Royster, on our workshop dealing with choice and choice alone, or are we also looking at magnets?
We would talk about magnet as a part or an aspect of choice. Yes, sir.
With magnets, we have a specific program in a specific school.
Yes, sir. Choice
can be more closer to where I live.
Yes, sir.
I mean, choice. There's really no.
We don't ask you why you want to go. You just say you want to go there. Now, we know from talking to people that some people go because of the program. Some people go because it's on the way to work. Some people go because their child has daycare in that vicinity after school. There are a lot of reasons they go.
For example, like the school that I'm going to, I don't get along with people there, so I'd like to go to another school.
Yes, sir. On occasion, that may come up as well.
Okay. One last thing. We had here the schools, high schools listed that had the biggest wait list, we had the high schools where the capacity was for additional students.
Yes, sir.
What about Wade Hampton, Riverside, and Woodmont? What would we fit those three schools in?
I'm sorry, what was the last part of what you said? Mr.
We've
Sutton?
got three schools that aren't listed. We've got Wade Hampton, Riverside, and Woodmont. Those three schools aren't listed.
I'm not sure about Woodmont, but I don't believe Riverside has any choice into it at this point. There's probably some their own choice, but there's no opening for more. And would that be true of Wade Hampton as well, Ben?
Well, I'm very sorry. I'm getting old. I can't hear real good.
I'm already old, so don't worry about it.
Got 8 at Wade Hampton.
What was the?
We got three schools that we haven't listed here, Betty,
That we don't have listed?
that we don't have listed. We've got Wade Hampton, Riverside, and Woodmont. We've got high schools listed that we got room for more students. And we got some high schools, 7 of them to be exact, that are listed here because they have
Wait list,
a waiting list.
yeah.
So what about these 3 remaining schools?
I think they picked just based on numbers.
They have to be over 20 to have been in.
Had to be
Right.
over 20 students to be on the list of wait list. So you mentioned,
Wade Hampton has 8, for instance.
Yes.
yeah, these are last year's numbers. I mean, there was no wait list at Greer, for instance. And Wade Hampton only had about 8, ended up with only about 8 last year.
Well, they
Now,
got,
that can be very different this year.
they got
It just
0
goes back
listed.
to all that demographics we talked about and how that big group of elementaries moving into middle and high, but
For wait list, we got Greenville, Carolina, Southside is 0.
they didn't have wait list.
And so, but those, then I'm still looking, what about the 3 schools here that we don't have, they don't have a wait list and they don't have additional space, is that what we're saying? So that's what I would classify Wade Hampton, Riverside, and Woodmont as? These other 11 schools, they have either, we can have more students or we got people waiting. So would you
Well,
classify these 3?
let's talk about Woodmont a minute.
Okay,
All the students that got in, that wanted last year to get in, got in. But we're not saying we're saying, there's not a whole lot more capacity. So that would not be a school we would want to target based on preliminary looking at, because there's growth in the attendance area and so forth.
so the workshop we're talking about now would not use last year's numbers. We would use this
Well, that
year's
depends
numbers?
on when it is, I mean, it
We
depends on
won't
when
schedule it until we have this year's numbers.
All right,
Excuse
so
me.
we don't have to worry about last year's numbers.
Yes, sir. That's all we had available at the time we put
Okay.
this together.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Dr. O'Connor.
Thank you. Ms. Wells made a point that I think is really important about not relying just on waiting lists, because I've never had a magnet program in the area I currently represent, but have always supported them nonetheless because I believe in the programmatic offerings being available in the district. But a lot of people probably wouldn't even try to go because it's prohibitive in terms of the amount of time, even if transportation is provided. So in the same way, I want to bring up the point that just because a program isn't thriving doesn't mean it's not a program worth having. So I wouldn't want the numbers enrolled to be the way we made decisions either, because let's just say we've had a decline in enrollment in Southside IB. There might be a number of reasons for that. Maybe it hasn't been fully funded, or maybe teachers have left, or maybe there are problems at the school that people don't feel as comfortable, or because we have other programs around the county and some of the students are attending there. So I guess what I'm saying is when one of the things on the list was that we need data. I would just hope that when we have the workshop, we would also get data that is beyond just what the enrollment or enrollment trends are, but perhaps an explanation behind why we think the enrollments are as they are, so that we're not just making a decision to say, okay, well, this one isn't popular anymore, therefore we don't need to keep it. It might be that when we're looking at what other districts outside South Carolina are doing in regard to choice, and we looked at some of the districts like Greenville in that consortium that you've talked about, Dr. Royster. Well, what are the trends with the rigorous programs such as IB or AP Scholars programs, or if you don't have that IB? So I guess I just want to see that when we talk about data, it's not just about wait lists or numbers enrolled, but again, data about what we think such programs do for kids when done well, and whether or not we think we need those in Greenville County. So if we believe that language immersion, by all the research and experience we have, is really critical for students to learn foreign language well, is to start earlier, then what recommendation would the administration bring about making sure that immersion opportunities are more broadly available than just if you happen to live near Blythe or happen to be able to tolerate the bus ride to Blythe, and and so on. But that data that you bring is really going to be critically important to what kind of conversation we can have about the value of those programs, if that makes sense. So
we can certainly bring information about that, but the data we have is the data we have. The data is who's there, who has to be there that's not there. Now, that's the data. Now, we can talk about other things. My suggestion would be, and again, we're getting into things that I had hoped would be a part of the workshop discussion. If we ask the community what it is they believe they need to have some choices about, to me, that's the starting point. We know who we have. We know where they came from. We know who's waiting to get in. And we know where they're waiting to get in. What we don't know is the unexpressed demand. So how can we go out and assess the unexpressed demand? And again, those are, I think, discussions to have as a part of that process.
Okay, if there are no other comments, Mr. Davey, we really appreciate this report. Look forward to the workshop. And the next item on the agenda, 3.09, Fair Labor Standards Act and Employee Work Group. And Dr. Royster, would you like to make comments on this item?
While Ms. Gibbs is pulling up her presentation there, this is not a topic that would necessarily be unfamiliar to you. Generally, when it comes up, is when we have bad weather, because that's when people talk about the various make-up opportunities if we miss days. We basically have 3 categories of employees in Greenville County Schools: salaried, exempt, which are most of the people sitting in this room, professional staff. They meet a criteria established by the Fair Labor Standards Act that allows them to be exempt from work time regulations. We have another group, they're hourly employees. For every hour they work, they get paid. If they work more than 40 hours in a week, they receive overtime or compensatory time at the rate of 1.5 times an hour or 1.5 times their pay rate. Then we have a third group that is somewhat unique to us, but not solely unique to us, of employees that under the Fair Labor Standards Act, they would be considered hourly. So if they worked over 40 hours, they would be eligible for overtime, either in the form of compensatory wages or compensatory time at time and a half their normal rate. But we chose I believe as far back as 1999, as best we can determine, to categorize those individuals as salaried non-exempt. So if they were to work over 40 hours, they would qualify for overtime or compensatory time. But what's a little bit unusual about them, a little bit unique about that work group, and there are various numbers of people in various categories of work groups that fall under that heading, because of the demands of their job. And when we engage their services, we say that I don't know the exact word, Ms. Gibbs, you may work up to 40 hours, but your minimum schedule is 37 and a half.
Correct.
And because of the demands of some of those jobs, they work some varying number of hours in between there, but they're not eligible for anything extra unless they go over 40. But they owe us every week, unless they're on leave for some reason, 37 and a half hours minimum. For some of them, for some weeks, they might work a little more. For some small number of them, every week they might work a little more, but inside the 40. The challenge has always been they're not all exactly the same. We have not yet devised a good way to either move them to be hourly employees, and you'll see in a few minutes the reasons why. They can't become just salaried employees. They don't all need to work 40 hours every week. They all need to work at least 37 and a half. The more you study this, the more you can understand how we ended up here, because there's not a clear answer. But the first time you look at this, like the first time I saw it when I came here, it made no sense to me. That you create a group of people and call them salaried, but they're really hourly. There's nothing wrong with being an hourly employee. Don't really know why we made that choice, but when you get into it, it's extremely complicated, and every fix that we find is not a fix that fixes everything. It just creates a new set of problems. So the question came up about that. So we wanted to go over today, here's the categories, here's the work groups that are within the categories, and here's what this looks like. Hopefully what I've said is not more confusing, and that it will help guide you through the presentation, which we also hope is not more confusing. But it's a confusing topic, and it affects a lot of people.
All right.
Ms. Gibbs.
Well, here's my here. Okay. So the Fair Labor Standards Act became a law in 1938, and it was amended in 1966 to include state and local governments, including school districts. But basically, the Fair Labor Standards Act is the law that defines who is exempt and who is non-exempt or hourly. It also sets the minimum wage. It also tells you how you have to have records kept for pay. And then there's some issues in there about fair and equitable pay. It looks to us, I've been doing some research, that we put this current structure in place as early as 1999. And there were a number of court decisions in the early to late 90s regarding school districts in multiple states where they were not following the record-keeping requirements of the Fair Labor Standards Act. And so I think school districts in general, in Greenville County, we have evidence, documented some things starting in 1999 about how we recorded time and how these pay groups were paid. So there's two categories, basically. Exempt employees are executives and administrators and teachers and professionals. This group is paid to do their job. So if I am in a committee of the whole meeting and I had something that needed to be done by tomorrow and it didn't get done when we finish this meeting, then I'll do that after 5 o'clock if it was due tomorrow. And that's part of my job. So that's what we talk about. You're paid to do the job. If you're in a non-exempt, and typically the word people use is hourly, you're paid every hour that you work. So you record your hours, and if you go over 40 hours, you get time and a half for those hours. So you can see we have 6,275 employees that are exempt and 3,524 that are non-exempt. So on the hourly non-exempt group, We have FANS employees, but they don't work 12 months. We have bus drivers and bus aides. They don't work 12 months. Then we have building services and maintenance, and they do work 12 months. And that group, that building service and maintenance, are on an 8-hour-a-day work schedule. So that's how they're set up. The other groups are set up at 7.5. And there's numbers in the presentation. So this weird group, or strange group, of salaried people that are truly hourly involves secretaries, clerks, aides, plant engineers at elementary and middle schools. There's a certain segment of ETS technicians that by law have to be paid on an hourly basis, school nurses, and then district level support staff. So secretaries in the school district offices, for example. Of that group, 245 of those are 12-month employees, and 1,458 are less than 12-month employees. And I think for the fact that some of our group don't work year-round, but we're spreading their salary year-round, kind of makes this even a little bit more complicated than in a work group where everyone works all year. The advantages to the employee are they get their pay spread over 12 months, and they pretty much can plan what a regular check is going to look like. They also get their insurance deductions taken across all 24 pay periods. So if you're a FANS employee or a bus driver or a bus aide, we have the same cost for our insurance for a year, but you have to deduct that money over 20 pay periods versus 24 for people that are in the salaried work groups. So this is just an example. It may be too much detail, but we have employees in this work group that are 185-day employees, 190, 200, 205, 210, 245. So an aide, and we've talked about this some when we've had the audits where people weren't working their required hours. So an aide at 185 days at 7.5 hours a day is being paid 1,387.5 hours as part of their salary. And then we record keep to keep up with those hours. If they go over 40, they get time and a half in a comp time bucket, not paid, but in a comp time bucket. And when people are hired, and we gave you a copy of an offer letter in this group, we state that their salary is predicated on a 40-hour work week, but their work schedule could be less than that, 37.5. So time worked between 37.5 doesn't qualify for a Fair Labor Standard Act overtime. So what we have recognized is for this work group, one of the difficulties of this work group, we shut down for 3 days for weather, snow, hurricane. It's hard for them to work additional days to make up their missed time. So we allow them to take that time worked between 37.5 and 40 to offset the time that they missed when the district was closed. And in 2010, we went to TimeLink in 2009, 2010, and we issued a letter to all employees in this category, reiterating this 40-hour work week, but the 37.5-hour schedule. Really, before 2009, and I got here soon after that, everything was done on paper at the school level. I looked back at some old audits from that time period. There were a lot more discrepancies because you were trying to do everything on paper. Once we started with TimeLink, we've had a lot more ability to monitor and make sure we're doing things right. And if a person, some people in these work groups, we do an automatic deduction for 30 minutes for their lunch. That's custodians, that's plant engineers. It was really done for the convenience of the employee also in FANS. So they didn't have to walk to the front of the school and clock in or clock out for lunch, go back and clock in. If they work during that 30 minutes and don't take their lunch, then they're trained on how to enter that time as time worked and not have that deduction automatic. We are updating at the moment this school year to Kronos. They purchased TimeLink, and they won't be supporting TimeLink, but we already were using Kronos clocks to feed the time into TimeLink. So we kind of focus the next few slides on what are the compounding factors that help make it difficult to do something with this group of people. So we have multiple categories of people. And one example is a classroom aide. They go with students to lunch, so they need to be paid for their lunch because they're working during their lunch. Other people have a scheduled lunch break, or we hope that they do. We would like to think it's better for them to take a break. Those would be like a clerk or a secretary. And I mentioned before about if they have a scheduled lunch break and they're required to work, then that should be reported as time worked. So if I'm a clerk at a school and we have an influx of visitors that day and I don't get to step away from my desk and I eat my sandwich while I'm sitting there, then that's working and they would be paid for that time. If I left the front office and went somewhere else to eat my sandwich, then I would clock out and then clock back in. So there's really no one good model that works for this work group because some of them have to be working during their lunch and some don't have to work during lunch. And then we've started looking at details that if you're a clerical person or a classroom aide, the school hour is different in elementary, middle, and high. So there is some inherent scheduling issues in the middle and high school that a classroom aide might always need to work slightly more than 37 and a half to cover their students' needs in a school day. Most of the demands from these positions can be met in a 37.5-hour work week. We couldn't make everybody 40 hours and have less people and get all the work done. I don't think that would work. We do know that if we were to change to a 40-hour work week, all of the people you see in this room, all our teachers, all our principals, are set up on a 37.5-hour schedule. So we wouldn't want to be accruing sick leave differently, using sick leave differently. And if we were to move everyone to 40 hours, that would be a significant cost. And there would be a cost if we decided to move people from 37.5 to 40. So our plan is, and we've been working on this starting last year, when we move to the Chronos system, we will have even more refined ability to look at time. And we're planning to take that data and look at that, and perhaps we will be able to come up with position analysis. So this position needs to be an 8-hour. These can stay at 7.5. But that's just a possibility of some of the things we've talked about. And we know that that would have budgetary impact, so we would plan to bring any recommended changes as part of the budget for FY21. So I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Mr. Meeks.
Thank you. Lynn, I sent Dr. Royster a letter that I received from an individual employee, and I'm assuming he has shared that with you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I shared it with the board members so they are aware of what the letter contained. One of the biggest complaints of this person was that they are working on the 40-hour schedule, and that if they work their 40-hour schedule, then that 30-minute for lunch is automatically deducted from their paycheck, which means that they are actually working 37 and a half hours. Okay, and that they are unable to build up any comp time so that when the school is closed, they are unable to use any comp time because they don't have any comp time unless they do work over 40 hours built up. Is that correct? I guess I'm asking, am I interpreting what they told me?
If they were not working over 40, that is correct.
Okay.
Now, I did not, from Sunday night till today, get to look at all plant engineers at the elementary and middle level to see on average how many hours they were working. But we have encouraged managers to allow their employees to work some overtime to build up some comp time for weather. Couple of days.
Which would also be the case with custodians that are on a 40-hour
Right.
week. We try to always make sure that custodians have time in the bank, so to speak, that when we have inclement weather, they have hours they can pull down. So we have a rather large work group within the custodial group that they're also set on 40 hours.
With a 30-minute deduction.
It's rare that we ever hear there's one of them that doesn't have some time built up to take during inclement weather.
Okay, is this time accumulated year after year
Yes,
after year?
it carries over from
So
one
they-
year to the next.
So they never
Yes.
lose that time?
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
if they
right.
don't use it, then they don't lose it, is that right?
We also have a practice when it gets to, how many hours? Up to a certain number of hours, then we can pay those hours out, so that bucket's not so large they never be able to take that. 75? So when it gets above 75 hours, then we would pay down some of that time, you know, give them a check for that bucket, rather than trying to schedule that person to be out 75 hours.
Okay. When you're saying in your presentation that everybody's predicated on 40 hours, right?
Where we
Okay.
put that in their offer letter, we say your pay is predicated on 40 hours.
Okay, but you only have to work 37 and a half hours.
Correct.
Okay. I read somewhere in my, I'm Google smart now, so, but I read somewhere that some districts says that the 37 and a half hours becomes their regular week, and that they can pay them overtime after the 37 and a half.
I think that is the practice of some businesses or other districts, but you also, from my research, can define your work week as a 40-hour work week.
I read that also.
Yes.
But you have to, I think you not only had to define it as 40, I think you had to practically let them work 40 hours. And what I'm gathering is that we don't do that to everyone. We only let them work 37 and a half hours. And that becomes, I thought in my mind,
Okay.
is a regular week. And although I know that under the federal statute, it says we do not have to pay them time and a half unless it's over 40. I know some districts do pay them time and a half, or some districts do pay them straight time instead of comp time. And I understand that.
We actually have a way to poll districts in South Carolina. So last week, we sent this
Okay.
out, but I think with the start of school, we only got 2 responses from districts to answer our question. Do you have a salary non-exempt status? And then how do you pay those people? And we can continue to follow up to see what other districts do.
What did the two say? What did the?
One of them said, well, ours doesn't exactly work like that, but it's very complicated. You may want to call. And that came in yesterday. And then the other did pay after, they did pay straight time after the 37 and a half.
Is Charleston one of those districts? that-
Charleston's the one who said call.
Yeah, well,
Right.
my understanding is that they do pay
Right,
them for
right.
over the 37 and a half. And I just noticed also in the example that you had, it was based on 37 and a
Right,
half
right.
hours and
And-
not on the 40. And I think that was the biggest complaint, was that everybody is not treated the same. Recently, I had an opportunity to visit several schools in my area, and I talked with a clerk who used to work at another school and was required to work 40 hours a week with no extra pay. And then where she's working now is 37 and a half hours. And that's, doesn't seem to be fair and equitable to all our employees if we're requiring some of them to work 37 and a half, and others 40 for the same amount of money. And then those that worked 40, I asked her if she got time off. She said, no, not unless they worked over the 40 hours. So she was back in the same bucket as the
Right.
other employees. So I noticed, I appreciate the presentation, but it didn't really answer my question, what is the solution?
Well, I think we believe the new record-keeping system, we've been 10 years using automated time cards from paper. This new system will even give us more details of being able to capture how many people truly are working over the 37 and a half on a consistent basis. And we would like then for next year's budget to come back and make a recommendation on this group, understanding that it could be position-specific, it could be for the group as a whole. We don't have an answer at the moment.
I understand from Dr. Royster when he and I talked about this, was that one of the problems is although you're telling the employee that their salary is based on 40 hours, they're being paid hourly on 37 and a half.
The calculation is based on 37 and a half. Yes, sir.
And that if you put them to the 40 hours, you wouldn't have to pay them more money, but their hourly rate would go down.
Correct.
And that there's some other,
Yeah.
problems
And
with
you would
that.
have to, like now, your sick leave is accrued at 7 and a half and used at 7 and a half. If you change their schedule to a 40-hour schedule, they'd have to be using their leave time at 8 hours and accruing at 8 hours.
And really the solution, we believe, going forward, again, now that we're able to actually better capture what people are actually doing, the way the new system keeps time, is to, as Lynn said, establish, all right, this work group, you're 38 hours. You get paid for 38 hours. You're 37 and a half, you get paid for 37 and a half. And there might be some that need to be paid for 40, but to go in and distinguish that they do, and really the only equitable way to do that, if now we're going to say you're going to work 40, would be to compensate those at 40 with more than those that are being compensated at 37 and a half. And obviously that has a budgetary impact. And until we can capture that, because you see there's large numbers of employees up there. If you're talking about increasing a work day by a half hour a day, that's what, about an 8% pay raise? If you went from 7.5 to 8 for all of them, that would be 8%, whether that included what raise they'd get ordinarily or not, pretty substantial cost. So that's why it needs to be aligned with a budget recommendation. It would be nice to get out of this system, but as you can see, there's all these factors as to how we ended up in this system.
And I don't remember anybody ever complaining to me about this until now.
And I've been here
And we've been
12
doing it
years.
since
and
1999.
And I mean, I occasionally have a question. I know I questioned it when I came in because it was different than what I've seen. But people said, well, that's what we've always done. It's in the offer letter. And I can tell you, I have had very few questions over the years about this particular situation.
Well, it just seems wrong to me that we are paying some employees 40 hours, and some 37 and a half, the same amount of money. And that just doesn't seem what I think fairness is. You're making some employees work 40 for the same pay, you're making others work 37 and a half. You're making some employees take a lunch break automatically and others not.
But
Well,
I'd
now,
like to
part-
clarify that if it's automatic deduction, okay, and there's this many pages of people who have the 30, this is how many positions have the 30-minute deduction. But it's real clear if they have to work, like we're down 40 custodians, and they're having to work, then their supervisor corrects that they're working, they didn't take that 30-minute lunch.
And I don't think we'll ever be at the position practically or from a budget standpoint where everyone can go take lunch because of those one-to-one in the classroom aides. But best practice would be everyone would get a little break and they'd be able to go eat their lunch away from their job. And for those positions where they can do that, we should continue to do that. Now, if you're a one-to-one aide with a special needs student, you can't really do that. You got to be there with the children. If you're that kindergarten age, you have to be there with the children like the teacher is. But certain jobs in the office or the plant engineer or the custodians, they should be able to go and take their lunch away from their work responsibilities. That's the better employee scenario.
Okay. The district was very lucky. We just snarled in a deputy superintendent from another district who was superintendent. Could I ask how they did it in Spartanburg 5? I didn't hear.
We spilled our tea.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you or wake you up over there.
He was taking his 30-minute lunch.
He's working through it though, so he should get
Put him
paid.
back on the clock.
Mr. Meek, would you rephrase your question?
I'm just wondering how you treated the 37, I'm assuming you had 37 and a half hour employees in your district.
Yes, sir.
How did you treat those employees if they worked over the 37 and a half hours?
For each hour between 37 and a half and 40, they had 1 hour of comp time.
Okay,
Everything over 40 was comp time.
At time and a half.
a time and a half. That's what-
But with a caveat, they could not accrue it past a year.
They could not accrue
They
when?
could not accrue it past 1 year.
Okay, so if they used it or lose it?
Right.
Okay, so we let them accumulate up to 74, 75? or
75.
Up to 75, and then we pay them the difference.
And then the 75 carries over to the following year.
So they could,
Right.
sort of like their sick
Right,
leave would
yes.
accumulate and would
And
accumulate.
remember, those people who might have earned comp time in a week, but over the course of the year in that audit hadn't worked their paid hours, they could take that comp time and apply it to those hours they didn't work in a schedule.
Okay, and if I understand the slides and from the information I looked at, our employees are only allowed to take comp time unless it's over the 75, then we pay them for it. I didn't know about the
Yeah.
75 until
Some,
today.
some work groups, maintenance, get paid their overtime, right? Jamie knows better than me.
Kind of a quick aside, when you hear the term overtime, think in terms of the system automatically paying overtime at time and a half. Because we're a public entity, we can assign comp time. The calculation is still time and a half, but it assigns hours. So the hours sit there until either the supervisor keys them into the system to be paid, or if, like we talked about with makeup time or something like that, then those comp time hours would be available for that purpose.
And
So
they
the
could-
employee has some control over when and how those hours are
But
used.
they can only use those if it's weather-related times?
They could use it to make up time if they miss time. So the comp hours are sitting there to either be used against hours to be worked, like leave time,
Right.
or they can be paid.
Okay, I just thought I read in here it said something about for bad weather or whatever, you could take it
I
off.
mean, it could be that.
That's the
Yeah.
time between the 37 and a half and 40 that we knew this in this gray area, for a better term. We have let people over the last 3-4 years, when we've been closed for bad weather, we have used that time to offset the time they missed. So it didn't have to truly be in a comp time bucket. It could be in that gray time between 37 and a half and 40.
So if you work over the 37 and a half and less than 40, then it's a comp time, but you can only take it off for weather related.
Right now.
Oh,
Right.
does that build up on the 75 or you lose that?
It's not part of that 75. That
part
75
of that
is only calculated after 40.
When you hit 40.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before, Jamie, remind me if I'm correct about this, before, we didn't have the ability to track electronically at 38, 39, we tracked at 40. With the change in Chronos, with the change in Chronos, we can now track 38, 38.5, we can track anything above 37.5. Before, somebody was, whoever they worked for, was keeping it down on a piece of paper, so to speak. So when we had bad weather, they could draw down on that between 37 and a half and 40. If they hit 40, we were tracking it, and it was going in that time and a half bucket, either for pay or for 1.5 hours for every hour they had in there.
Okay, so between the 37 and a half and 40, only could take comp time.
Correct.
Okay, and if you work 40 hours, you don't have that option.
If it goes above 40, it goes in that bucket, and you can take it as time. Let's say my secretary, when we're hiring principals, worked over 40 a couple of weeks, and she had some time and she had a doctor's appointment. She could take that comp time instead of her sick leave.
But if I'm
to be
working-
gone.
But if I'm working 40 hours, and I've got 30 minutes coming out of my time each day, I only have 37 and a half hours. So I can't build up any comp time between 37 and a half and 40.
You'd have to work more than the 40.
I'd have to work more than 40, which would be time and a half,
Yes,
and that would build on it.
yes.
To make it further complicated, for every hour and a half you built up like that, when we missed a day for bad weather, you could count the hour and a half, and it would apply for every hour and a half you missed, even though that was straight time. In other words, you didn't have to have worked a full extra day over to get credit for a straight time regular day. You just had to have 7.5 hours in the bucket, which you would have gotten at 5 points on.
But in that case of that person who said, well, I have this time coming out, I'm only getting 37.5, we would have hoped that their supervisor would have let them work over 40 some period of time to accrue a comp time bucket for those snow days or for other reasons.
But he could get paid for it, that person could get paid for it any time,
Correct.
over 50.
And if they were working during their lunch, they should be fixing that automatic deduction to say they didn't take that 30-minute lunch today, they're working.
So if I work over 40 hours, I can take comp time or get paid for it. I don't have to wait to take comp time. Is that right?
No, it automatically goes into comp time unless your supervisor directs us to pay it or it's over that 72 hours. Or you
You don't
it.
get a choice for pay, and when it hits whatever that number
Right.
was, then we'll pay the over that. Inside that number, for the most part, we're going to want you to take comp time.
Yeah.
Now, for certain jobs, we don't really need for you to be gone anymore. So, I don't know, just for an example, an electrician, maybe we can't afford for an electrician to be out that much. We might pay them off inside the, 75 hours?
Yeah.
So who makes all these decisions? You?
No, sir. Our supervisor makes those decisions. I just know that's the circumstance. Part of it from having been here for a long time.
Okay, I'm gonna yield for a little while, let somebody else see if I have any more questions.
As you can tell, it's a complicated situation.
Thank you, Dr. Turner.
You're welcome.
All right, Mrs. Goodwin Caldwell.
Well, most,
Do I need to extend, Nancy? You've got 10 more minutes. How many? 10.
well, most of the questions that Roger asked were answered, but, so the ones that are on that 40-hour, we have to have them on a 40-hour? Everybody can't just be on 37.5?
We could not get the custodial and maintenance work done if we had them on 37.5 hours. Now, we're looking inside of the other people. Now, those are the people that are already on 40 hours, maintenance and custodians. We're looking, and that's for the purpose of what we're doing this year, to see, based on the time worked and their responsibilities, are there some within that 37.5 to 40 that need to be 40, or need to be 38, or need to be some number other than 37.5?
Okay.
Most of the work can get done in 37.5. Here's a problem. Here's a good example. I think it was up there, but a little more detail about it. Let's say you're a one-to-one aide, the special needs child. First thing you do is you go out to the bus or the car line and you get that child and escort them into school, and you're there with them all day long. At the end of the day, you repeat that process and you take them out to make sure they get on their bus or in the car safely and on their way to where they're supposed to go. Well, if you're in elementary school and you're an aide there, you're paid for 7.5 hours. And their day is what, 6.5 hours? That means you got 30 minutes on either end of the day to accomplish what I just described, going out, getting them in, getting them settled, taking them back out. If you're at the high school day is 30 minutes longer, right? You now have only 15 minutes on the front end of the day and the flip side of the day to get that student out. Now, if they ride in a car, probably not an issue. If they ride on a bus, it may not be there in 15 minutes. So there's an issue with the variance in the length of the school day that makes it very difficult for particularly that group of employees to get their work done. And it extends a little bit to the difference between the school day length at elementary, middle, and high school for office clerical staff, to have the office open the expected office hours. So there are issues with the time schedules that they need to work that create disparities between the 37.5 and the 40 to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the schools and of our students.
Why are the plant engineers part of this category and not salary?
Well, they didn't used to be, and that's something else for us to look at. Right now, the high school plant engineers are not. There is a test for whether you may be exempt or not. And that test has several items on it. Do you direct personnel? Do you have control over a budget? You go through and click off every one of those questions. In every one of those questions, the answer to it is yes for a plant engineer. Till we get to the very last question. The very last question is your salary more than X? I don't remember, Jamie can tell you what X is. For our high school plant engineers, because remember they're bigger schools, they got bigger crews, their salary was higher. Higher than middle school, and middle school a little bit higher than elementary. They meet all the tests, including the last one. 3 years ago, Jamie, or 2?
It was the last year of Obama.
2 years ago, the administration announced
They were going to change that salary from $23,660 to $47,500.
It was actually 55.
That
when you looked
time,
at
that's
this.
Fif-
This-
But that didn't pass.
It didn't, and this is the latest.
But the
Yes.
problem is we were told in advance that that was going to happen.
In January.
We changed the pay that summer. We moved the high school ones up slightly. We looked at how much we'd have to move the elementary and middle, and it was so large, we simply said, well, we'll just put them to hourly, and they'll just get overtime. They look back at how much overtime they've been getting, how many hours they've been working, whatever. And we did it that way. Then they backtracked on it and never did it.
And
But
now,
if we hadn't changed it in the budget year going forward, we'd have gotten caught in the middle of the year. So they've now changed it to, what's the number now?
47,500 is the
Which is-
proposed new level.
So that's something else for us to look at. It would be nice if all the plant engineers were the same.
Right.
But that's the reason they're different.
Okay. Now, let me ask you that's about the plant engineers. Let me ask you about the fans employees. Because I had someone that came to me after this past year when we had all of those days out and they did not get paid for them. And you said that with them being hourly,
Now,
they
they're-
don't get paid.
They're
Wow.
hourly, they're paid for the days they're here. Now, we provide in every work group, as far as I know without exception, Joe's not here, we started doing this several years ago, some opportunity, if you're hourly, to either be carrying hours that you can get applied to the missed snow days, or we provide some opportunity for you to make it up. In other words, you come in and do something extra, or you go to a training. Without exception, we have opportunities across all work groups to do that. Same will be true in transportation, food and nutrition services. Any group that's not called in to work on those days we have inclement weather.
And
But if they-
we also have increased this year the number of personal days. So they may choose to
Yeah, no, they don't
leave
have
their
to do it. They
personal
can take the
days
personal
there
days.
this year. Again, we went from 2 to 4. So if I don't
Yeah,
schedule
but
those
if they
days,
don't have that in the bank, if they don't have those hours banked up, they, like she told me that they didn't get paid for like 3 weeks. And that was a real hardship.
I don't,
On
we'd have to
them.
know who it is and look at them individually.
Because they don't get paid for whenever we go out for Christmas break.
right.
It was
Right.
right after that. And then the days with the snow, and it was like, they
Close
missed
to each
like
other.
3 weeks of pay, and it was a hardship. So what can we do about that? If they don't already have hours banked, then, you know.
We need to
let's
make sure
create a
they're
big
afforded.
hardship on them.
We need to make sure they're afforded an opportunity to bank hours or to go to
Make
some
up
sort of training or do some sort of work to make up the time. One of the reasons we have this issue right here is by taking hourly people and giving them a salary. That would prevent what you just described. But that would move them over in this same category that we're having all these issues with now. When you move people from an hourly work group that have to be, under the law, treated for wage and hour purposes as an hourly employee. But that's one of the reasons that these people who don't work 12 months, clerks and aides and so forth, were moved over in this salaried, non-exempt category to begin with.
So, Dr. Royster, what is it you want to do about it?
well, we need to try to figure. We need to try, if we can, with Gilman County, to figure out, is there some way to actually pay people for what we need them to work?
Uh-huh.
And we want to bring that recommendation back to you because it's going to have a dollar. It's going to have a dollar amount on it.
Right.
But we don't want to pay people to work more than we need them to work to meet the demands of the district.
Right.
Nor do we want to hurt them or treat them inequitably. And again, one of the problems is this is the way we've done this thing since 1999. Mm-hmm. We didn't get in this situation overnight. We now have better information available to us to try to correct it, but every correction we come up with, then we figure out, well, there's a downside to it. We could just pay them for.
We could pay them hourly.
We could pay them
But
for
that
when they
means
work.
they
Then-
would be
then
like,
they're
they
in
won't
this-
get paid in the summer. They might not have time accumulated when we have snow days. So then you have other set of problems. And it's hard to take away something that you've had in place for a long time in terms of spreading their pay.
Okay, and then about the comp time thing, they accrue comp time, but then they are told how they can take the comp time, that they can't take it for certain things. So they can take comp time for what?
It needs to be scheduled with your supervisor, just like,
We don't care why they take
Yeah,
it.
but if you got it and the supervisor never lets you take it,
Well, we need to know that. Now, they need to be reasonable about it,
then you
but
could get it paid
but-
too. Those get to be difficult when you're an aide with a student. Those are the most difficult. You know, I'm a one-on-one aide, so if I want a comp time day off, then I've got to arrange for a sub, and we should be able to handle that and let them take a day.
okay,
If
All
not,
right.
have them call us. Right. Okay.
all right, thank you.
Before I have the next two speakers, I'd like to extend this for another 10 minutes. Mr. Sailors.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Part of my questions, Mrs. Goodwill-Caldwell covered, so let me just pick up off of, Dr. Royster, you said that when it comes to hourly employees that do not work 12 months, they have opportunities over that period of time to do other activities, attend trainings, et cetera. So if 1,000+ employees that fall in that category wanted to participate in those offerings, we've got that ability?
most of them are getting it by extra work. When we shifted to this, I don't remember the number of years ago, we used to not do this, and the biggest issue we had, the largest work group that we had an issue with when we had bad weather were custodians. So we started the practice of maybe, Jamie, 10 years ago or so, of making sure through their supervisors that they had some time built up. And that's worked, I would say, exceedingly well, because we really don't ever hear any concerns
But
about it.
aren't custodians considered 12-month employees?
Yes, but when we have bad weather, they have, generally speaking, they all have comp time built up to take in bad weather.
Well, then let me clarify it even deeper. Forget custodians, let's talk about bus drivers and fans employees.
Right?
Okay, they're 9-month employees.
Yes, sir.
When they go home for the summer, they have literally no income. When they come back to school, it's generally 2-3 weeks before they get their first paycheck.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Many of them cannot afford to find second jobs during the summer because of the brief period of time, and money that they would receive over the summer generally would offset expenses related to child care, et cetera. So again, out of 1,000, you got, according to this right here, 580 employees in fans and 462 in transportation are less than 12-month employees. So if we don't give them an opportunity to get a salary over the summer, there's over 1,000 opportunities for them to find something to do?
Well, the only thing I can say to you is we've not had anyone come to us and say, I don't have any opportunity to do anything.
Okay, now,
In fact, I don't know how many Mr. McEwen has employed under summer labor this summer, but the first offer for summer work and maintenance goes to our existing employees.
I understand.
So that's their first opportunity.
And for example, a number of fans employees over the last few summers have worked summer jobs as custodians
And I'd hate to.
and summer feeding.
I'm well aware of that, Lynn, but it goes back to my original point. The work that they're making, the work that they're doing over the summer is going to be offset by what they're having to pay for childcare. Now, Dr. Oyster, you were talking, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. I wouldn't want to speak for Mr. Urban since he's not in here. Mr. James is sitting here. He can describe some of the things that bus drivers do. They run a lot of activity trips. They run summer camp schedule.
We did the transportation for the reading camps, summer school, bus washing. We need clerical work in the office.
How many people are we talking about?
We probably employed over 100. This year,
Okay.
everyone that come to transportation said they wanted summer work, we were able to accommodate this year.
Okay, so then,
Last year, we only missed it by 2.
okay. If you have an employee in this category that's just, for whatever various reason, unable to participate in a summer offering, I know we do not have the ability to take their or their payroll and stretch it out over those months because they are hourly. Do we have a way to potentially satisfy that need on a participation basis?
Yeah, the way to satisfy it is what created this problem we're looking at right now. And that's to take that classified person and convert them to a salary and pay them in the summer a portion of what they earn during the regular school year. And a lot of them won't want to do that.
We polled bus drivers 4 or 5 years in a row, and it was very mixed as to whether some of them didn't want to make less during the year. They'd rather do something different in the summer.
How many bus drivers are retired from other jobs?
Like 10, 15%.
Okay.
To bring in an example, I won't call on Dr. Turner, he may have dozed back off, but in Oconee, which now this has been 15 years ago, we use the concept of set time. So all of our bus drivers, for example, that particular work group over there, they were paid all summer. They were paid a set time based on their estimated route time, and it was divided over the 12-month pay period. Now, if they missed some time, they got that deducted, but in essence, what they're doing is the same. What we were doing then is the same thing as this. Here's your pay. We're going to now divide it over 24 checks instead of over, how many checks they get now, Jamie?
24.
No.
Oh, the 20.
20. So we're going to further divide it out. So we can do that, and it's already set up to do it that way. It just puts more people in this group.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. And there may be some other way to do it. That's the one I'm most familiar with.
All right, Mr. Meeks. Okay, Dr. O'Connor, either one.
Thank you. This question relates to whether retirees who decide to come back to drive buses are still limited by if they earn more than $10,000 in a year, they can't drive a bus. Is that still limited?
Yes.
If they retired after 1, 2,
Under the same.
under same rules.
Under the same rules as teachers, principals,
Right.
et cetera.
Well, I
Yes.
just want to say that I got a call from a retired educator here in Greenville who wanted very much to be able to drive a bus, and he made the comment to me that he and several of his friends who had retired, that was one way they felt they could still earn a little income and be engaged in the district, but that it was, he felt that the district would serve itself well in overcoming the bus driver shortage if we worked to advocate with the legislature to exempt bus drivers so that we could allow those retirees to drive the bus, and he thought there were many out there who would choose to if they weren't limited to only earning $10,000 in the course of the year. And I think that's a great idea, and this just gave me a chance to say it again.
Sure. And we
there's-
advocate for them removing that from, we got so many challenges with hiring, that would help with substitute teachers, would help with teachers. Now, right now, I got to tell you, because I think somewhat directly raised this point, we only have 5 teacher vacancies.
How many bus drivers could we use?
Way more than that.
Well, let's
All that guy and all his friends, we could hire them tomorrow.
Well, what, can we do something to try to help the
Continue-
legislative?
Continue to advocate to remove that cap for critical employment, and to me, bus drivers, like substitute teachers, it doesn't matter what subject area it is, we're going to have a critical shortage of substitute teachers equal to or exceeding the shortage we have of bus drivers because of that cap. Because that's where most of our substitute teachers come from, recently retired teachers.
Well, if you thought you could just bite off one little bit at the time, and you picked out a critical need with bus drivers, wouldn't you think that's pretty likely across the state? That you'd have?
Both
yes.
of those are
All of the
likely
HR
across the
people
state.
in education in South Carolina agree that should be on that list
That
for bus drivers, right? Well,
So I'll
The
just
only
throw that
place
out in
that finding
case
a bus
the
driver is not a problem
advocacy
is
committee would
in
be
depressed
interested
economies.
in taking that up at all. It would really be helpful.
Thank you.
Well, I'll come to that committee too if this committee of the whole doesn't count. But I thought since y'all are all here, I could just say it right here. All right, thank you.
Roger, I have another person. Would you like your turn, or you would like to close out?
Let the other person go and I'll have the
Mrs.
last word.
Wells.
You have to extend that time though.
Well, I mean, I thought I understood why the whole 37 and a half thing existed, why that was ever created, but now I'm just kind of befuddled by the whole thing. I mean, I always, full-time is 40 hours. If you're full-time, you're 40 hours. I guess they're all kind of iterations. And with the millennials coming, they're going to want all kinds of different hour schedules anyway. So, just the substitute teacher comment you made, I guess to clarify on that, we pay substitute teachers who have a teaching credential at a different rate than people who maybe have a 4-year degree but
Right.
not a teaching certificate, right?
Yes.
And we changed that, how many years ago?
well, it was that way when I
12?
came
It-
12 years ago.
It
so.
does.
It changed.
It's
though. I
an
remember-
issue for us now for our lowest paid substitute teachers. Because if you subbed every day at the lower wage, which is the day-to-day sub wage, which is $100 and
Nothing.
something dollars a day.
Nothing, yeah.
But if you subbed half the year, you've now hit the $10,000 cap.
If you're retired.
If you're a retired teacher, and that's the largest number of our subs, and a lot of our better subs, just retired teachers. Now, there's some exceptions. Critical
See? We're all
critical
having a problem.
certificate area or a critical needs school. Same as for a regular teacher. But the routine day-to-day sub at the routine run-of-the-mill average school,
If we had one of those.
so we have some of those.
Run the-
Not talking about their performance, talking about their economic status. Average school, you don't get that break. So it's becoming more and more challenging to find substitutes because of the earnings cap and how it applies. Basically cuts it in half. Now, we didn't have a problem this year because the statutory requirement kicked in, and it's a calendar year.
Right.
And the last year was, obviously, our school year was split over 2 calendar years. It will be a problem this year.
But didn't I remember there's something where, once they hit that $10,000 cap, that we changed their I mean, there was something
It stops their retirement at that point until the next January.
okay, so they don't,
Which
if
is-
they keep working, they don't collect the
Which is not
retirement.
worth it
But it's.
for
yeah,
sub-pay. We
Right.
have some teachers and principals doing that. It's worth it for them.
Okay, well, so what I believe I remember, although it was a long time ago because it was past 12 years ago, I think I was my children were in the school system when that change occurred, where they made the adjustments where you had to have a teaching certificate to make
The
a
higher
certain
pay.
daily rate, and you cut the daily rate if you weren't a certified
Right.
teacher. And what that did at that point was there were a lot of moms who were stay-at-home moms who really thought they would want to go be substitutes, who decided it's not really worth it. I've got a degree,
Right.
you know, it's not really worth it for me to go get paid for that little amount, given that I have a 4-year degree as well, even though I don't have a teaching certificate. So it'd be interesting to look at how that pool has changed, because maybe there's something in how you determine how you're going to pay those subs, teaching certificate or not. You know, you have lesson plans laid out, so.
It is still certified versus non-certified. And it's probably, we just now, back in 08, 09, when the economy was bad, we took the certified rate from 145 to 100 or something like that. I mean, a dramatic. We're just now back up to 125. Now, if you do a long-term sub, it kicks into your certificate pay on the 11th day.
Okay.
And I don't,
And for-
the non-certified, I don't have in my head. I don't.
And for
somebody can
critical needs, we've been
look it
kicking
up.
that pay in
Yes.
when we know it's
Yes,
long-term at the
yeah.
front end.
Yes, yeah. So then I would just like to ask the advocacy committee to consider maybe see if they could get the Fair Labor Standards Act repealed, so we don't have this issue. That's it.
All right. Mr. Meeks.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions to follow up. One was, we are tracking the 37.5 to 40 now, are we not?
When we can back into it now, when we go live with the new Kronos system, which we hope will be soon, we will be able to see it more clearly, okay?
And what are you going to tell employees when you do that? When you roll this out?
That their letter they got said they're paid on 40 hours, and that time can be used if we're closed.
Tell me again.
Their letter, when they became employed, said you're paid based on working 40 hours. After 40, you get time and a half.
Okay.
Your schedule could be less than that, and that if you have that gray time between 37.5 and 40, you can use it to offset closure days, weather days.
And during the-
Until we come up with a recommendation for a change that would have to come back to you because it will have some monetary impact.
Okay.
And during, to more fully explain that, and during the course of this year, we're going to track time in a way we've not tracked it before in order to give us that information, because they need to hear that. So I don't know why, you know, it's hard to ever figure out why people get concerned about something, but been doing it since 1999, and nobody really all that concerned about it. All of a sudden, something changed a little bit, now people are concerned about it. So we want to alleviate that concern while we try to figure out what's the path forward.
I can only say they just hadn't talked to me. They hadn't sent me a letter. My next question is, I think a few minutes ago, Jamie, you answered a question to Dr. Royster. What is the minimum wage for the exempt? What is the wage that changed from 26 to?
Right now, well, right now, it's 23,660, but we're anticipating it going to 47.5.
Now it's
35.
Could have been 35,000 and change.
Okay,
That's my thunder.
yeah,
Because I was reading somewhere.
that's
just
right, I'm reading on the wrong
35,308
line.
Instead of 47.
35,308.
Okay. Okay, we're straight. Thank you. Thank you all for the presentation. I understand it a little bit better. I don't agree with all of it, though, but I do understand it a little bit better. Thank you, Ms. Morrison-Fair.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gibbs, and we appreciate all your work and the effort in your presentation. We are almost at the end. We're almost at the end. Item 3.10, bus transportation. Dr. Royster, would you like to weigh in on bus transportation, item 3.10?
Why not? Covered the entire spectrum today.
Yeah.
Mr. Davey, I believe you're going to present, but Mr. James is here to assist you in answering any questions. Is that accurate? You're going to go over the questions that were asked. You all got a lot of information about this.
Thank you.
Perhaps more than you wanted, I don't know. One thing is important, I think a couple of points that are important at the outset. A route is a bus. A run is the number of times it goes out, leaving a location, picking students up, and coming back to a school. So most buses make 2 runs in the morning and 2 runs in the afternoon. 3 runs in the afternoon. Within that, it's possible for a bus to be late 3 times in the morning and 3 times in the afternoon. So the basis of all the comparison is the potential is 3 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, times the number of bus routes, that's the bus, times the number of buses that run, times 180. Then, for purposes of answering these questions today, we have 2 sources of whether a bus is late or not. One is an absolute 100% accurate source. That is, we've geofenced every facility in the district, and when the bus passes through the geofence, we know exactly what time it got there. For transportation and administrative purposes, not for purposes of answering this question, but for our purposes, if it passes through that gate 15 minutes or less before school starts, we consider it late, even though a student could still get to class. What that doesn't tell you is why. It just tells you it's late. So to find out the why, you go back to the spreadsheet that you've got. That's the why. When a bus is going to be 20 minutes late to pick up a student or drop students off, they call the dispatcher. So you have the actual call-ins for 20 minutes late. If you're 20 minutes late, you're probably going to be 15 minutes late to the school. So you might have some numbers in there that actually got there on time. You might have a few in there that aren't represented there that didn't get there on time. But considering the large number overall, it's very accurate. And when you look at there's more than 200,000 opportunities to be late, the actual number of times that we're late is very low. It's very low for mechanical reasons, and even with the driver shortage, it's only around 2.8, less than 3% of the time. Now again, remember there's 6 opportunities to be late every day, times the number of buses, times the number of days. So it says to us, obviously, we have an issue, but the issue perhaps is not of the magnitude that we might think. Now, if you're sitting there waiting on that bus, you're not happy that you're waiting on the bus if it's 1 time or 12 or 15 times. So Mr. Davey's going to share with you, kind of within that context, the answers to those questions, and then certainly if you have any questions or clarification that you need, we'll try to provide that. Mr. Davey?
Thank you, Dr. Oyster. I know we had about a dozen questions that we were given, and I believe all of you have those. Is that correct? You see the questions and the answers to those questions. So I'll be happy to go through those one at a time, and of course, Mr. James and I can answer additional questions as we go, if that's the way you'd like to do that. As far as how many buses GCS has in the fleet, 300 and 91 state buses, which represents 351 route buses and 40 spares. We also have 147 district buses that are in our fleet. And the average year of the buses is 2013. Per SCDE, not every district is up to that state average. As you'll see in the detail there, we also have about 23 buses that are 1988 and 1990 models, and SCD has expressed an interest to go ahead and remove those as soon as possible. And then the next priority would be to pick up some 82 passenger buses, which would help, especially out in rural areas, to pick up larger numbers of students. So that kind of goes into our next question. Capacity of our buses ranges from 15 to 78. Of course, our smaller buses, 15 passenger buses, are utilized primarily for special needs, and then they go up to passenger capacity of 78. We gave you a spreadsheet to show you which buses are assigned to which bus centers, and that's done by the SCDE, State Director of Transportation, or his designee. Right now, I believe, Mr. James, that position's in transition, so right now it's a designee doing that. And they assign those buses to either the Joe Madden bus shop or the Taylor's bus shop. And then, of course, Mr. James, his staff, has the ability to move buses around for route capacity's sake. They wouldn't move one around because they wanted to exchange an older bus for a newer bus between two centers, but if they needed a larger capacity bus at one center versus another, they may swap two buses out to accommodate that need. As far as this coming year, the number of drivers hired, and we talked about that a few moments ago. The need for bus drivers, we're right now at 342 drivers hired and 113 aides, to include 13 hired and 7 aides hired this summer. We also have an additional 53 sub-drivers and 32 sub-aides. And then as far as how many drivers are at each bus center, between Taylor's and Berea, we have 161 of 180 available positions filled. So I guess that's 19 short there, Mr. James. Is that correct? And then we're actually 3 overhired at the Donaldson and Golden Strip areas. You can see we're 184 of 181 positions. Also, as far as aides and subs for those areas, the Taylors and Berea bus centers, we have 48 of 57 aides hired, plus an additional 15 on-call sub-drivers and 9 on-call aides. And then as far as Donaldson and Golden Strip, 55 aides for 54 positions, and an additional 38 on-call sub-drivers, 17 on-call aides. As far as substitute drivers hired for this coming school year, there are 3 permanent subs. We used to call those, some of you have heard the term floaters. We've called those floaters. That's a little confusing. We've started to use the term just a permanent sub. They come in every day and go wherever we need them to go to drive. They just show up and they go and they work. So we began to call them permanent subs. And then we also have 53 on-call subs. And Mr. James, you correct me if I'm wrong, a good portion of them actually work every day.
Most every day.
Right, as far as your on-call subs. And then there's 26 on-call bus aides. How many times were buses late because of no drivers for their assigned routes during the 18-19 school year? You can see 5,520 times out of, Dr. Worcester gave an explanation, out of 292,140 opportunities, 5,520 of them were late because of driver shortage. That's 2,213 in the morning opportunities times, and another 3,307 times in the afternoon. And there's a spreadsheet there that you can look at. We apologize for the length of that spreadsheet. It's quite long. It's just that information's tracked every day all throughout the school year, and there just wasn't any other way to give you that information. That's used for, drivers call into the dispatch fills in the sheet, and that's recorded every day all throughout the year. So you're seeing 180 days of activity in that spreadsheet. And then I think the next question, how many times and what schools were students late getting to and from school because of mechanical problems? You can see again 1,193 runs out of 292 1,140 were affected by mechanical breakdowns. Again, that's 802 in the morning, 392 in the afternoon. And then for schools affected, you can again look at that call center report, and there's a line there that will show you the school. And multiple times you'll see a route listed, and then you'll see schools below that that don't have that route listed. That's all the same route. That's that driver running in elementary, which if they're late in the elementary, it's likely they may be late at the middle, which means they may be late at the high. So you'll see that domino effect there. Of course, we experience late routes at a more frequent rate at the middle and high. I think Mr. James would concur with that. We don't have near the issue in the morning being on time for elementary school. You correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. James.
That's correct.
Let's see. As far as the breakdown of what schools the buses were late to, that information is there in the spreadsheet chronologically. And then there's one final question there about why Greenville County Schools didn't get any of the new buses that the state's purchasing with Volkswagen settlement money. As you'll remember, we got involved in a pilot early with the state last year under Mr. James' leadership to get 21 new propane buses here in Greenville County. We got the infrastructure going. I believe we were on the front end of that, and maybe, Adam, correct me, the second in the state to make use.
That's correct. The first, in that round of expanding the pilot, we were the first district to get them.
Right. So because we received those 21 buses, we did not get additional buses with the VW money. And so SCDE is trying to spread that infrastructure to other districts to allow, the expansion of quantity in those areas as well. So we have expressed both verbally and in writing to the state that we are very interested in looking at additional infrastructure if we're allowed to pick up additional new buses as well. So we'll be happy to answer additional questions for you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Mrs. Grayson?
Thank you guys very much for putting all this together. It's a very complicated issue, and I want to thank the board for increasing bus driver salaries in their budget, and thank the administration for recommending it. I think my area is one of the hardest hit by the bus driver shortages. I've been through this list twice, and it looks like there are only 5 days when a bus was not reported late to Blue Ridge High School or Blue Ridge Middle School. And I understand, I've been advocating the legislature for the age of the buses, and I understand the bus driver shortage, but every time the bus is late to Blue Ridge High School, I hear about it because my mom calls me and I have to take a kid to school, or she does, and it's a lot. I know there are a lot of parties that need to come into play to do something about this, but I like Dr. Ballos-Connor's suggestion. We have got to get more people in this job, and I would like to know from you, Mr. James, what can the board do to help resolve this issue in rural areas? I know, and Mr. Davey, you mentioned that an 82-passenger bus might help, but that would just lengthen the routes,
Yes, ma'am.
which would make the buses even later. So it seems to me like we would need to shorten the routes, increase the drivers, and maybe not run to all 3 schools because they're far away from each other.
Yes, ma'am. And I'll let Mr. James go into detail. Sometimes you're faced with whether you're going to double a route and send the same driver out twice, or you're going to, combine a route and send one driver on a little bit longer route. So it's just a decision that Mr. James has to make about which one's more efficient, effective to get the students to school on time. But I'll let Adam talk a little bit more about what you guys can do to help.
Well, I think one of the things that we could do to help is to continue that legislation, or continue that advocacy with the State Department of Education for the $10,000 cap. I know of a few drivers that just aren't able to drive. Sometimes when they come in, we do have a couple that do it. They're usually going to work the beginning of February to the end of school, and that's it. And that doesn't help us on the first day of school. Now, specifically with Blue Ridge, I will tell you the Blue Ridge area was the hardest hit with the driver shortage. And because of the geography of the Blue Ridge area, the route times are extended. You know, if we bifurcated Blue Ridge Middle and Blue Ridge High, the runs, if you will, because I think almost all of those, if not all of them, are what we call combo runs. And similarly in the Greer area, most of those are combo runs. Only 2 of the 19 buses at Greer High deliver the middle school home before they take the high school. So that means 17 buses go from the Greer Middle bus loop to the Greer High bus loop, just like at Blue Ridge Middle and Blue Ridge High. If we did that, that's only going to increase the driver shortage, or increase the driver shortage, because we don't have enough drivers to fill the routes that we have. These are numbers that we're looking at, but consider these numbers are from last week. It's improved a little bit this week. We've dissolved some routes, which really is going to put children on the bus longer. Basically have half capacity on 2 buses. We've dissolved those where we can and put a full bus. It's going to mean children on the bus a little bit longer, but less buses will be late. We'll communicate that before the first day of school, say this is your bus route, this is your bus time. I mean, so that's going to cut down on late buses.
But if the bus is late, it doesn't matter how many kids are on it. I mean, you take 2 late buses and your stats look better if you put them all on one bus, but all those kids are still late to school.
Right, but when we dissolve the routes, instead of having to double a route, have another one route go in area A, go over to cover area A and B, it's all in the same route. The ones that we have dissolved, we run in our routing software, which is not, 100% accurate, but it's very accurate as far as times. It can account for traffic and things like that. But it is going to, the 6 routes that we've dissolved, we're still going to be able to get those schools on time. We did dissolve 7 routes, and we undissolved 1 because we just couldn't figure out how to get it to school on time with dissolving it.
And that's in the Blue Ridge area alone?
That's actually in Berea.
Okay. Have you dissolved any routes in the Blue Ridge area?
We dissolved 1, I think, in the Blue Ridge area.
Okay. How many of the 13 drivers we just hired, any of them going to Blue Ridge?
I don't get down generally into the detail of the Blue Ridge area. I think 4 went to the Taylors, and of the overage of 3 that we have at Donaldson, 2 are going to Taylors, and we're going to pay them, we're going to compensate them for their time to drive from the Donaldson area to the Taylors area.
That was one of my questions too, is there a way to compensate? Because it looks like we have overcapacity in the south and undercapacity in the north. So we do compensate them for drive time if we have somebody willing to run those routes.
We do. I mean, unfortunately, when they go from the south to the north, especially if they come from the Golden Strip area, that puts them in 385 traffic in the afternoon. With one driver that was in the Blue Ridge area last year, actually, he lives 1 mile from the Golden Strip Bus Center. He ran that for 6 months, and this year, transferred to Golden Strip, and we compensated him from the time he got in his car to the time he got out of his car.
Okay.
One of the things that's important to note as you're maybe looking for your next question, we're talking about having, at the Donaldson Center total, got 184 drivers in 181 positions. Well, those are regular routes. The other 3 are what, as you mentioned earlier, used to be floaters, and you're authorized to have about
24.
Total?
24 floaters.
District-wide?
Yes, sir.
And we have 3
Yes,
of
sir.
24, and they happen to be in the Donaldson area. So
On the
we're
southern.
still, even with a bus on every route, we're still way under, even though that says over, don't want to misunderstand there and look like we got an abundance, that's not enough to meet the absence needs. If you didn't have those sub-drivers, you'd be completely lost there.
Yeah, and if there's any confusion on the numbers, keep in mind, these numbers fluctuate daily.
Right. What is the protocol for no driver? I mean, does that mean that nobody showed up for work, or did we know ahead of time that we weren't going to have a driver on Route 207 for a month?
A lot of times we know ahead of time. And, I'll give you an instance. One of the buses that's chronically late on there was 208, Northwood and Riverside High. That driver happened to be on FMLA for 6 months or more. Some instances we split them. Like, for instance, that one is easily split because it's only 2 subdivisions almost directly across the main road from each other. So that's a very easy route to split. meaning, 206 might pick up one half of that run and 209 might pick up the other half of that run, and try to get everyone to school on time as best we can. Sometimes we split, sometimes we double. There was an instance, almost the entire year for League Academy, we had to make 2 Lake Forest runs before we went and picked up the League Academy kids. Those are certainly not the only ones that we've done that way. Those are just examples that I can give you right off the top of my head of ways that we cover. Sometimes we put supervisors behind the wheel. I will tell you, putting a supervisor behind the wheel is not my go-to because morning and afternoon is chaos, and the supervisors are putting in about 10 or 12 hours a day if they have to drive. And when they're not driving, or if they're driving, they're not answering parents' phone calls, they're not answering administrators' phone calls and emails. So unfortunately, last year, we did put drivers behind the wheel. We put routing coordinator behind the wheel. We put the director behind the wheel some. And those are just all ways that we mitigate that or attempt to mitigate it.
Okay. So how many do we have routes for all our drivers up there this year?
We are still short in the area. I don't know Blue Ridge right off the top of my head. The 2 drivers that we are bringing to from the southern end to the northern end, one is going to the Blue Ridge area and one is going to the Wade Hampton area.
Okay. And why are there more subs in the north, in the south than the north? There's like more than twice. Is that demand? Is that number of routes? There's 53 or.
Well, a lot of the subs are, they're subs for various reasons. I mean, we couldn't list in the time a lot of the number of reasons that there are subs. A lot of we have a lot more longevity on the southern end than we do on the northern end. Like for instance, some of the subs down there have been drivers for us for 20, 25 years. Not as much on the northern end as on the southern end, but that's just one reason. A lot of our subs on the northern end show up to work every day. I give you an example. We reduced one driver on the northern end because his dad died and he had to take over the family business. He still shows up almost every day, but he cannot commit to the full time because the family business takes some of his obligations away. We have another driver that has a standing appointment with a special needs child every Wednesday at 8 o'clock in the morning. That prevents her from being a full-time driver. So a lot of our subs, like Mr. Davey alluded to earlier, are there most every day, and mostly morning and afternoon.
Can a sub driver from Donaldson or Golden Strip be sent to?
We can do that, and we have done that. We usually do Donaldson to Golden Strip or Golden Strip to Donaldson or Berea to Taylor's, Taylor's to Berea, try to keep them geographically on one end of the district or another. But we have found that when we shift from the southern end to the northern end or vice versa, the drivers will quit. They just don't like the commute, especially with a sub. They're not getting full-time benefits, and they don't get the same pay raises that a full-time employee gets. It becomes an economic decision for them very fast.
Have we ever had a bus job fair at the high school, like the community?
That's a great question, and we do have job fairs all throughout the year. I think December is the only month that we don't, but I will tell you that our southern job fairs yield way more results than the northern end. And sometimes even at the northern end, we will get people coming from the southern portion of the district to the job fair on the northern end. I mean, we do have them up there, but they do not yield the same results.
I know y'all had one at Bonds, but I was just thinking, Blue Ridge is its own animal up there, and y'all might think about coming out there because a lot of people in Blue Ridge don't even come to Greenville.
True. I mean, I live in Blue Ridge.
They consider Greenville another town altogether.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Blue Ridge, so I definitely understand that. But true.
I mean,
now I will tell you that
here's what I'm going. I mean, I'm not trying to be adversarial. I'm trying to come up with a solution because that community is outraged, and it's not only the kids. It's not only the people with schools in schools. People when kids don't ride the bus because it doesn't show up, the car lines block the roads completely. There's no alternate route to get from if you need to go down that road that Blue Ridge Middle is on, you cannot get to work for an hour and a half because everybody's in a car, because nobody carpools because they live so far apart.
Right.
And so I think that if we reached out to homeowners associations or advertised, digitally somehow and did something in the community at the high school, you might have some interest because everybody suffers from this problem. And Joe Dill's up there, making it worse by blaming the school district. So I just, if there's anything that I can do to help, let me know. I appreciate it. I know that you've worked really hard, and I appreciate you coming to the district and straightening out and tackling this mess.
Yes, ma'am.
That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Shamley.
I don't have a question anymore.
Okay, great.
I don't know whether this question has been answered before or not, but whatever happened to student drivers?
The federal government, say outlawed drivers under the age of 18. South Carolina was one of the last states, if not the last state in the nation, to do away with them. And that was in 1986, 87, somewhere along in there. Now, if you're a student and you're 18, you can legally drive so long as you drive within the boundaries of the state. You couldn't drive a field trip across state lines. Now, not always our perhaps best pool of applicants being an 18-year-old student.
I know when I was in school, we had student drivers, and they were great. And I mean, in that, we have a shortage of drivers.
It would be nice, but they just don't allow it anymore, Ms. Goodwin-Cowell. I agree.
But you said if they're 18, they can.
If they're 18.
Have we ever tried to get
One
that
of
pool
the
of
13
18-year-olds?
We have. I've reached out to principals, never en masse to principals, but I have reached out to some individual principals, and said, send the kids that are not going to college, send the kids that are not going in the military, or they're looking for full-time work, because an 18-year-old starting out at $15.21 an hour with full-time benefits is pretty good. So we have reached out. One of the 13 that we've hired and trained this summer is a recent Greenville High graduate.
But I recall as you do those days, in fact, this is starting my 40th year. So I can recall being at the high school when we ran the buses out of the high school, and almost every driver was a student driver.
Right.
And if they did something they shouldn't do, you just fire them on the spot, and there were 5 more waiting for the job.
Right.
And that just, I guess those were some of the, as we like to think back sometimes on the good old days. Just not that way anymore. But as Mr. James was answering that question, I can recall you going over, I believe making 2 or 3 trips over to one of our schools to individually recruit a student that had said to the principal, I might like to be a bus driver. So we're trying to get those. And,
do y'all put that out there? I mean, how do y'all communicate that to the students in the high schools that will be 18 that might want to be a student, be a bus driver?
Just through the normal job fair. We don't, other than the recruiting that I have individually with the principals, when they reach out to me for the 1 or 2 that express interest, or me talking to a principal saying that's our only means of reaching out to get that high school crowd. With our proximity, again, like Dr. Royster alluded to, we will certainly take an 18-year-old, but with our proximity to North Carolina and the amount of field trips that go into North Carolina, especially during the fall, it can really hamper us.
I'm just talking about getting them to school and back. Like up in Blue Ridge, they might have some 18-year-olds at the schools that could drive those buses that could alleviate that. So, I mean, you said you reach out to some principals,
Yeah.
but I want to know what you're doing to communicate this, that if you're 18 and you have a valid driver's license and you're a good driver and you've been through maybe driver's ed or whatever, come in and apply for these bus driving jobs because we have a shortage. So, I thought you were waving at me over there, but anyway.
Yes, ma'am.
So I want to know what kind of communication do you have out there? I know we have the job fairs and everything, but you might need to target these that are just right over 18
Yes, ma'am.
to alleviate
I mean,
that.
we can definitely do it. I
Yeah.
think the way to do that would be through the school counselor also.
Uh-huh. Yep. You thinking. All right. Thank you.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Dr. Ball O'Connor.
I don't like to disagree with my great friend in yellow over there, but based on my experience with teenagers driving, they might, and I would agree. I'm not driving a bus either. But the point is, you have to pay more insurance if your children are teen drivers because teens have more accidents. So I certainly would not believe that that should be our pool. That's my personal belief, is that statistically, since teens have more accidents, and that is reflected in having to pay more for their insurance, and there's a lot more traffic on the road and a lot more distracted driving than we knew when we had our student drivers. I had those too. I just really want to register that if, as protective as parents are, if they had a choice of an experienced driver versus an inexperienced driver, there's no 18-year-old on the planet who would be classified as an experienced driver, in my opinion. So just want to say that.
Well, and I would like to clarify one thing, that we would only recruit a graduate. We would not try to recruit someone still in school. We would only try to recruit a graduate that's 18. And I understand.
How much experience might they have had? I guess that's all I'm thinking. I mean,
2 years.
oh, they'd have to get additional training.
Okay, everybody just, point in order. I have one more. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Roger, last speaker. Do we need time? 9 minutes. Oh, last speaker.
I got a minute? 9 of them, shoot, I don't need that many. Thank you all very much for all this information. It's
Yes, sir.
More than I probably wanted but as I sat down, the questions kept flowing through, so I didn't go back and look at them, sorry. It's great information though, and what I was really concerned about was that I've heard for years and years that some areas get a lot of the better buses than some areas, and so that's really what I was trying to substantiate or see if there was differences. I did note that with a little bit of my own spreadsheeting and my manual that if I'm pretty sure in my numbers that the buses between 1988 to 2010, we have about 160 of them. And that, and I was more concerned with Donaldson Center since that's in my area, and most of the buses, come from that area, Tritos. And I noticed that right close to 40% of the buses, the older buses, are at Donaldson Center. And I don't think there's any rhyme or reason. That's just the way it has turned out. I also noticed that the, from the 2010 to 2019, that Donaldson probably has about a fourth of those buses, around 25-28% of those, depending on where I dropped a number or not, which seems to be pretty good and average. I know we have quite a few more buses down there, so I was trying to tie that in with the buses being late to and from the schools. In 1998, I used to get probably 2, 3, 4, 5 phone calls a week. I haven't gotten any calls in the last 4 or 5 years concerning buses, being late and whatever. But at the same time, we do have a call center, so I don't have to answer those calls,
Right.
fortunately. And so it's all relative, and I think from the numbers and the statistics, it looks like we're probably doing a fantastic job, and I know that we're out there competing with firms who are paying big bonuses for drivers to come work for them, and anyone that's dealt with transportation knows that you have to be a special kind of person to be a bus driver.
I would agree to that.
You're not able just to go dump your load and be done with it. You've got to babysit these children day and night continuously over and over. Your load just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I appreciate all that transportation is doing. And I think that with the numbers that you have given me, that I am able to, when I hear somebody saying, well, we don't get our fair share, that when it comes to buses, that's why our kids are late getting to school and so on, that I have enough information now that I can dispute that and tell them, here it is. I will confess to you that I did not look through all the 166 pages. I glimpsed at it, but I did not go down and try to pick out different schools. I've heard from several of them. So I probably should have, but I didn't. And, I see that, you've got somebody that is taking care of that, and that's what you should be doing, and I do appreciate that. So thank you all for all this information. If I've got more questions, I know where you're at.
Well, I mean, Mr. Meek, if I had a few minutes, I would clarify that, we definitely do have late buses in your area. And we ran a pilot at an elementary school, Taylor's Elementary, last year, where we dropped off at 7 by 7:15 to get a greater on-time rate at Eastside High. We have now extended that pilot to 2 more schools, with Grove being one of them, to get Southside to school on time. Because, I mean, Southside really didn't experience a driver shortage. That's not why they were late to Southside. It's the traffic patterns and the time of day and things like that. So we're hoping to see as good, if not better, results by dropping off 15 minutes earlier at Grove. The other school would be Lake Forest, feeding into Wade Hampton.
Well, I know the south side for my son working there that was late quite a few times, but just do the best you can.
Yes, sir.
And the pilot that Mr. James referenced, one of the things that may result from that is we may be looking to bring you a recommendation to stretch our window a little bit on start and end times if the results continue to be positive, that that's making a difference in reducing late buses. But that would be something we do toward the end of the year in preparation for next year.
Well, it sounds good. Hopefully it works.
We're hoping.
I have 2 more speakers. I will extend for 5 minutes, and Ms. Grayson.
This is more of a request, but I would like to receive this data going forward, and it would be great if it could be dumped into a spreadsheet that's sortable by area and school. And I know it's probably, I don't know, this is a PDF, but it looks like it could be copied and pasted into a spreadsheet so that we could track it by area and also track improvement every year. That's it.
And
I have a question about, you said that y'all might, start times might be earlier. I have a question about when a school has a dangerous walking route, and I'm basically talking about Alexander, from that Assembly Apartments to Alexander. With that being a main thoroughfare, a 4-lane road that those kids are walking down, I know they're just 5 minutes from the school, that bus that goes there, could they not start earlier to get those kids from Assembly down to the school?
Well, specifically with Assembly and Alexander's buses, to pick up the kids at Assembly within the mile and a half, that would add almost an entire another bus. There isn't, when you say, pick them up, we would actually end up adding another route for Alexander for that specific apartment complex. Now, a clarification point, with these pilot schools, we are only dropping them off earlier at this point. We have not extended or shortened their school day at all. It's just merely dropping them off 15 minutes prior to when we do any other elementary school.
Well, I would like to have that looked at because, I don't want us to have a fatality out there on Blue Ridge Highway with those kids walking down through there to get to the school because they do walk that area. And I don't want us to not look at it now and not look at it until we have a fatality.
I understand. Yes, ma'am. And we have been out there. We've evaluated it. We've done that. I've been out there. The routing coordinator goes out to most stops. That's essentially what his job is. Then I'll go. Mr. Davies been out there. That still does meet the criteria for a walking student. There are crosswalks, there are sidewalks.
It doesn't matter that that's a main road with all of that traffic going down through there where they walk, the way that they walk there.
We are limited by the state's criteria. A mile and a half.
One of the issues with that is it's not the only place where
Correct.
all those factors are true. There would be no way for us to go and correct that at every place where we have a busy highway, but we do have sidewalks, we do have crosswalks, and in this case, there's actually an alternative that would keep them off of Blue Ridge, but they, for whatever reason, choose not to use that. But we would have that sort of criteria literally all over the district, and we're not able to do it everywhere. And there's not anything, at least at this point, based on their review, anything there that distinguishes that particularly from any other place where you would have that same walking along the 4-lane road. In fact, within very close proximity to there, you have the same condition at Montague, you have the same condition at Berea Elementary, you have the same condition at Westcliff, you have the same condition at Armstrong. In all of those locations, you have students walking along major thoroughfare, but they are on sidewalks, and there are crosswalks, crossing guarded crosswalks at appropriate locations. So all of those would be very similar circumstances, and that's within probably a 6-mile radius of the school.
And one of the things that we did do at Alexander was have a member of the administration come down to the edge of the property to receive those students and to see them off in the afternoon.
So is that still happening? Is that going to be ongoing?
Yes, ma'am.
Because I know that they had stopped it for a while, so it is going to be, it's
that would
back
be
in
without our
place.
knowledge.
It's back in place?
I'll talk to the administration.
Okay.
It had not, we were unaware that it had stopped.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Wells.
Just quickly, was going to ask for the same thing. Could we get the PDF that you sent us, can we just get that in spreadsheet form so we can sort and look through it versus reading?
The issue we had when we tried to do that from Ms. Grayson's request, because they don't all have the number beside them, it messes up all the data. We'll try to do that, but I'm not sure we can do it without messing up the data. We've not been able to so far.
Okay, so it's in a tabular format, fished out of?
Excel. But when Mr. Davey alluded to, let's say, when you look at that spreadsheet, you have Route 208, and it will say Northwood Middle. And right under that, I remember that because that's my daughter's route. Northwood Middle, and then right under that, you'd have Riverside High, but it would not say 208 beside Riverside High. So anytime you go and sort Route 208, you're only going to get the Northwood Middles. And the way to identify any area is whatever the first digits of the bus number is, that's the area that it's in. So 208 being the Blue Ridge area, 308 Wade, Hampton, Greer.
And we make that change going forward, is not big, but at this point, I don't believe it will be worth it for us to go back and reconstruct that data from last year just for
Yeah, I'm not looking for
analysis purposes.
just,
Right.
yeah, so.
But that was the issue with resorting it.
Okay, well, if you don't mind just sending it as it is, knowing that it's gonna have that formatting problem, that'd be great. And then the other thing was, with regard to start and stop times, I certainly think it makes a lot of sense to consider, with the limitations we have with transportation right now, looking at where we need to adjust times across the district, if that makes that better for students. You know, whether it's a high school student who has to sit and wait for an hour after school gets out, or an elementary student who's having to go early. I think looking at those is great. So I'm assuming you could do some sort of geospatial analysis. Can you, because you're collecting that data now, where you know where buses are late. I mean, can you do an analysis like that to kind of figure out the timing?
We can, and that's how we came up with the 3 schools that we chose that are feeders to the high school. With the 3 areas that we have the most problem out of.
Okay, so I'd just say, I think 8:45 is kind of the earliest we want high school students to go to school, based on my recent experience with teenagers.
Well,
But
what we really are looking at, based on that pilot, is moving the elementary, not moving the other 2, to create a bigger window. Window has always been our problem. We made a great improvement when we made the last shift, because the window was too narrow.
That's right.
And now, that was a great improvement. Might should have gone maybe 5 more minutes then. Now it's probably more like 10 or 15 minutes, because every day, and you all see this as well as I do, the big issue on late is traffic. It probably exceeds mechanical.
Right.
And it's approaching the driver issue, and it is unpredictable traffic. You know, predictable traffic, they can route time and around, but it is unpredictable traffic delays, and it's not consistent.
right, thank you.
Okay. Since we do not have any other speakers, let me say, Mr. Davy and Mr. James, we appreciate all the work that you do, because hopefully I can speak for everyone on this board that if buses don't show up, we don't have school. And it's not to say that everyone in your administration, Dr. Royster, is not doing a great job, but we do appreciate it, and it's almost amazing with all the challenges that you have, that we have the safety record that we do. So thank you very much for the report, and I will turn it now back over to the chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Marson-Fair. At this time, we will go to 4.01, Building and Grounds, Facilities Project Report. And at this time, I will ask Mr. Carlin. We'll probably have questions, but I'll turn it over to Dr. Royster.
Mr. Carlin's coming up, and I don't believe he has a particular report to give, but he's available to answer any question you might have based on his lengthy experience now with the district of some...
Beginning my 7th week.
7th
There you
week.
go. Well, you've been here too long now.
So amongst these 140 projects on here, I beg your indulgence for a little bit longer.
Okay. Any questions? Mr. Meek.
Thank you. Welcome to the district, Mr. Carlin.
Thanks, sir.
I do have a question. I think we completed or almost completed all the security windows at the schools.
We are close. We are not complete on everything. The vast majority of the transaction window work that we've been doing is complete, but we have some other projects that are still in progress and not quite complete.
Okay, I was lucky enough to see several of the new windows at schools a week or so ago, last week I guess it was. And overall, I think it's great. I got mixed reception from some of the clerk secretaries. You know, some liked them, some don't. Some things are, you know, I basically said, if you got an angry parent, it's good to have them on the other side. But I noticed at Berea Middle School that the glass in that partition seemed to me like it was like 12 inches, 14 inches. and the rest of them were maybe 6 or 7 inches.
Okay.
And it looked like a big fellow like myself could crawl through that space if I so wanted to. So I don't know what, it is serving the purpose, but it allows a much more, and there may be other schools in the same situation, but that one stuck out to me, that, the workers were right next to the window. Some of them were back away from it, but it looked to me like they were right there at the window working, and it was probably an opening like that in the class. So
this is Berea Middle, you said?
Berea Middle School.
Okay.
Also, I noticed that the brickwork around the chiller sort of got in the wind.
Yes.
When is that going to be?
Well, the first thing that needed to happen was to make the area safe. So we took down every portion of that wall that was left standing except for a small portion that's up against the building. Nothing has gone back in place to shield the chiller yet. We're looking into what might be appropriate to go back, whether it needs to be brick again or maybe something that's more of a decorative screen. But I can tell you that brick wall did not have any structural integrity to it. I'm not quite sure.
No rebar?
It had horizontal reinforcing, no vertical reinforcing. Okay. So it was probably good that it came down the way it did.
Well, nobody was around.
Exactly.
Middle of the night, about three weeks ago.
Yes, sir. I can't remember the time, but it was after hours.
Okay, and I noticed at Carolina High School, the courtyard has, I don't think you were here at the time.
Is this the shade structure?
Shade structure.
Yes, sir.
And it looked to be doing the purpose. Is this made differently, and is it stronger than the past one, so when it gets a little weight on it, it won't come down again?
It's a great question. I'm not aware that it was installed differently. It may have been. I did talk to our project manager, Mike Chapman, and he spoke with the principal and seemed to be satisfied with what we went back with, but I don't know that it's different.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that all, Mr. Meek?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you. Welcome to the district.
Thanks, sir.
Just a few questions. So I know that we are now working through some HVAC replacement projects.
Yes.
Are these the first of the phased replacements of all the HVAC units? Are these unique to that process? The HVAC unit replacements, is this?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking to Mr. Carter.
Oh, no.
I sort of drifted off there.
He's on that 30-minute break.
Pause. Anyone?
All right. Is Jamie already gone? We'll go back on the clock now. I'm sorry, Mr. Lewis. You were asking about, I was listening.
I was looking at both of you.
You were asking about the HVAC replacement.
I wonder if I just look at Roger, somebody answers the question.
I believe Berea, Oakview, Crestview, all of those are through-the-wall units, which would be some of the oldest units we have. And then I believe those are the last through-the-wall units.
Okay.
The chiller replacements, those would be the routine planned replacements of those chillers based on age and condition.
Okay.
So I think probably the answer to your question is yes.
Okay. So the three are the last of the ones that we need to replace that are outdated.
Are through the wall. When I say through the wall, you go in the room and you see that unit looks like it's sitting on the floor and it's actually physically the unit through the wall. I believe that's the last three schools.
Okay.
Is that all right?
I think so.
Okay.
And Scott may not have time to be right up to speed on that, but I believe that's the last three.
I'm not sure it's everyone, but I'm pretty confident it is.
But the chiller replacements, that's part of the phased replacement of these items that we built during the BEST program and now need to be replaced. So we would expect all the schools to be on this list.
At some point, yes, sir, over the next several
within
years.
All the major systems from the BEST schools are going to begin to age out.
Okay.
And we're rapidly approaching.
Okay. Can we talk for a second about Fountain High School? I was in a totally unrelated meeting, and they were talking again about the sidewalks and the connectability to the trail, and it was with non-district staff, but they were under the impression that those were not happening. But I thought that at one of our last conversations there was a an outreach for them to share information back to us. Can we just get an update on, and maybe even by email, if not now? But
Well,
just where
I'll
are
give
we
you a
with
very
that?
quick one. We talked about this last week.
Yes, sir.
Carlin and I did, and Mr. Davey. And Jamie, who really has shepherded that project through design, is now being turned over to David Smith to manage the project. They've had a number of discussions. Now, Jamie was on vacation or out of town last week. So we've set up a time to get him back in to talk with him. We've got an issue with the way they've laid out what they'd like to do.
Okay.
In that their trail, their connector to that trail cuts across 2 driveways.
I think it's 3.
3 driveways. So we got an issue. That's not, we can't do that. So we've got to go back and see what might be an acceptable alternative. But we don't know the conversation that he had with the folks from County Rec or whoever he had it with, because nobody here now is privy to that. I think Mr. Mills is probably aware of it, but, so
Yeah.
we're still working on that. It's a work in progress.
Yeah, other than to say that Jamie did reach out to Ty Houck, who's heading this up for Greenville, as I understand it, to say, hey, we're really interested in seeing more of the plan in that area for the trail system so that we can look at it with the site and see if there's a better alternative than what has been proposed, which was
Because the
crossing
first thing
those
that we
areas.
looked at, when we simply were looking at the layout of the property, the topography, was to run parallel to where the elevation begins to drop. But what they brought back doesn't do that, and I think it has to somewhat to do with the way the drop-off loop was placed, and that would have been done based on OSF approval, and it may look different from the way it looked 6 months ago or 8 months ago or whenever they first looked at it. So there's still work to be done there. We can't agree to it in the form it's in right now.
Sure. So, but just for the benefit of kind of repeating what we've heard here to other people, the district is still interested in that going forward.
Yes, sir.
But currently, the plan that they've brought us is not something that we would be able to sign.
Not a workable plan from a security standpoint.
And who's the district? So Jamie is the district's point person on that, or is that?
Well, David Smith will be
Okay.
the project manager to carry out the construction management.
Okay.
But to address this part of it, that's probably going to be Mr. Carlin.
Yes.
Okay.
But he needs to get up to speed on
Okay.
all of it, and we need to better
That's all fine.
understand it.
That's all fine. I knew that there was something missing and just wanted to make sure that,
Yes, sir.
that during the transition that something wasn't lost there. But I hear you saying there is an interest to continue that as part of this project, but right now, there's not an approved plan.
Right.
Correct.
We need a more workable solution.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Wells.
Thank you. So to follow along with that, I guess my concern that this is sort of drug on, and I don't believe it's because of any fault on the county's side of things, is that the reason to really try to figure out the connectivity issue now is because they're starting to move dirt, and we already have a layout approved, and we already have a bid price that's come in. And so if we don't have something that works, then it becomes a lot more expensive, and then we begin to say, well, we can't do that because we've already built something, or we haven't built something, or, that slope's not going to carry. So I would like to know that there's going to be a big priority on making this happen. I did my own little search and look. There are a couple of hundred homes in that vicinity that represent, and that's right now, not counting the growth, that represent students that might go to that school. So if they have a trail connector where they can get on a bike or they can walk, it's a 10-minute walk, it's half a mile. If they have to get in a car and be carried or drive there, which a lot of them, they don't want to drive until they're 16, 17, 18, they just don't want to drive. It's like 1.5 to 2 miles to get in your car, because they're cul-de-sac neighborhoods if you look at it on the map. And so connectivity, we have the opportunity to get this right if we're proactive in trying to help make that happen. And it's better for our students. It's going to be better if our students can get themselves, we just talked about how bad the bus situation is, right? So if we can be proactive in saying we want to make sure we create connectivity for our students to a system that's going to be a public system of transportation, I think that's a feather in our cap. So, whatever I understand we've got an issue with safety and driveways and I don't know what that looks like. I know I looked at kind of what I thought with Terry or maybe Terry and Jamie when they had some plans here a few months ago. So whatever that looks like, I'd just like for us to have it decided early on, because like I said, it's going to be a lot cheaper. I know we got that big detention pond in the back, and then we drop down into wetlands, and so trying to navigate that and figuring out where we need the flat spot to accommodate a trail, we can do it really easily right now, and not so much so once we put a big old detention pond in, and we got a slope to work with, and then do you have fencing requirements? So just for me, there's an urgency there that I'd like to see us get to the end of what that looks like. So then outside of that, remind me, budget-wise, we came in under our budget.
Slightly under, yes.
Okay, so what was that? What was our budget? What do we have in the budget versus where we ended up?
Yeah, I did not bring that information with me.
We can send it to you, but it was a few $100,000, I think.
Okay, that's pretty.
Well,
pretty tight.
we had 3 bids, pre-qualified. 2 of the 3 came in under, and 1 came in slightly over. So, pretty good result.
Yeah, I do have the construction amount, which was $66,354,000.
Okay, so to switch gears, Roper Mountain Science Center, there were some issues with how we were going to handle the sewer. We've got a septic field at Harrison. It's not working well, we want to move away from, and so there was conversation about how we were going to handle that. Are we any further along? I had recommended that we consider some alternatives that don't involve a pump station and a big collection line, and I don't know that ever.
It did. We looked at 2 options. One was trying to go gravity all the way.
And that doesn't work.
Problem is you can technically do it, but with a 1% slope. But over that length, I'm uncomfortable with that, plus the disruption to the center. So what we've opted for is to do a full-blown upgrade on the lift station that we have, to basically rebuild it with more suitable pumps. The existing line will handle it, and just do it that way.
Okay. And how much did you guys dig into alternatives, like looking at a constructed wetland with a sand filter, or an alternative other than just saying, well, we don't think DHEC will permit it?
I can't answer that. I'm not familiar with that at all.
That's the part I'd like to just figure out. That was something that Terry Mills, I shared some information with him, and I don't know where it went. Because I never got a good answer back about. I heard, consultant thought it wouldn't make PERC, but that approach doesn't require PERC. And then it was, well, we're not sure DHEC would permit it, but I'd like to know for sure, because I know DHEC's permitted other places. So.
Okay. Well, I can find out about that.
And I can send you that information again if I need to. So then we have on here track repairs for rubber surface, and like Woodmont is listed, but that's one of the new rubberized. We just started putting in rubberized tracks. So are we already having a repair?
You're going to have maintenance to those rubberized tracks at a 5-year interval, and then pretty much a full replacement at 8 to 12. Mr. Garland?
That sounds about right. Right here, what I'm reading is 3-year rotations on the tennis courts, but I don't have the data on the tracks as far as whether that particular item is a repair or it's I know we do a minor surfacing at one time frame.
Like 5 to 8, I think.
And then once we get beyond the useful life of the entire track, we replace the entire surface. And then you get into where you got to replace all the asphalt and totally rebuild it. But I think these are repairs.
Well, so this is rubberized.
Hold on just a minute.
Sorry.
Without objection, we'll extend for 15 minutes. Thank you. Continue.
So this is a rubberized surface. So what is the life expectancy for a rubberized surface?
Well, you got to do, for lack of a better term, kind of like a partial resurface at a 5 to 8 year interval. You got to do a full replacement of the rubberized surface at a 10 to 12 year interval.
Correct.
And then you may have to go further than that, but that's probably the 25-year interval, and at 25 to 30, that would have been your replacement life cycle for asphalt anyway.
Right.
So, and we went to rubberized because it's just better on kids' joints and
Yeah,
stuff.
so
when they're-
number one, it's now become the generally accepted standard for all high school tracks. And the reason it became the generally accepted standard is because of the reduction of injury because less impact injury because of the surface.
Okay, so what we think we're seeing is just general wear, and it's an
Yes.
expected
We'll,
cost.
we'll
Correct.
check and make sure there's not something unusual there. But again, at a 5 to 8 year interval, we're going to have to be doing some pretty significant maintenance on those rubberized surfaces.
Yes.
And we knew that going into it. Not a surprise.
Okay, and then last thing, if you gotta go out there and do some stuff at Woodmont anyway, there is, from the time when we put the rubberized track in before, we removed some pavement, and then we have a lot of gravel, or maybe it's some concrete that we made into gravel, so there's a lot of gravel behind the stadium, which has become, in my mind, it's a safety issue, that it's a place where kids go and hang out, and they pick up rocks and throw rocks, and they've broken the window and the, what do you call it, the little place above where the announcers called the football
Yeah,
game. I'm
those
having a senior
press
moment.
box.
Thank
Those
you.
were millings that came out of
Yeah.
the existing parking lot.
Yeah, so I think they were put there because they thought it would be a better maintenance, it would improve from a maintenance standpoint, but it's created more problems. So if you got to go out there anyway and do a little bit of work, if there's a way to either, I mean, I think it'd be better to remove it and go back to grass in that area based on what I've seen with just students hanging out there and girls turning their heels because they're trying to wear heels to a football game and throwing rocks.
The other thing we actually discussed that this morning in our operations and maintenance staff meeting. We may look at the possibility of trying to pave that area as well.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wells. Mr. Shamley?
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of items. One, I don't know if this has come up, but I have heard through the grapevine that DOT may be considering taking over the area near the entrance to Roper Mountain Science Center, where they're currently using it as a staging area in order to widen that exit off of the interstate. And I understand that's where the one of the career centers is at least supposed to be being erected. So I don't know if there's any need for whomever to get in touch with DOT to make sure that doesn't go forward or is done properly. So I'm just bringing that really to the group for information.
Yes, sir.
The question I have is with respect to the maintenance, for example, these chillers and so forth. Am I wrong? I've always understood, and I don't really remember if I got it right, that we have a budget item or a pot of money, if you will, that we set aside for maintenance, and that
Yes, sir.
as that goes, I'm assuming that these repairs are coming out of that pot of money. Is that correct?
It depends on whether it's a major repair or a replacement versus routine maintenance.
Okay.
We've got a budget established in our operations and maintenance budget, our yearly money.
Right, like painting and odds and ends like that.
But
yeah.
also for pulling maintenance on our HVAC system, standard maintenance. When we get into major maintenance or replacements, then it falls into the capital side
Okay,
of the
that's
equation.
those chillers that are being replaced, is that
Yes,
what
sir.
you're talking about?
That's with capital dollars.
Okay.
Generally
And that's-
speaking, everything you see in your report is drawn off of the MARS, we call it the MARS money. That's that planned maintenance
Right.
replacement money. The other stuff, the more routine that you wouldn't see, that's in the regular maintenance department budget.
Okay.
But the ones you get the reports on, generally speaking, that's where they're coming from.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have.
Is that it? Thank you, Mr. Shamley. Ms. Goodwin Caldwell?
I just have a question, Dr. Royster, on the sidewalks that's Rudolph Garden. Can you give us an update? I know I received something about that being a problem, them wanting another entrance or something
Yes,
like
ma'am.
that.
I don't know that I can recall it all from memory. We'll send it back out to you, though, but the short version is this, that, for lack of a better description, they want to cross where they want to cross. Instead of using the sidewalks that were put in that connect down to where there is a either signalized or a guarded crossing.
Right.
And I think the difference is like 1,000 feet or something. And it would be unsafe to do what they want to do, and then we would not be provided with a crossing guard at two different points on the same street. We'll send you that back out, and if you have a question based on that, follow up with us, and we'll get the information. I'm
Okay.
afraid to quote too much of the details. I may not remember all of it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Is that it? Thank you. Dr. Ball O'Connor?
Yes, you thought when you said you'd only been here 7 weeks and to give you a break that this board would do that. But you can see that.
That ain't gonna happen, is it?
No, it's not going to happen. I just briefly wanted to associate myself with the comments that Mr. Lewis and Ms. Wells made about Fountain Inn, and really feel that those interests were well expressed, but wanted to make sure that I go on record as saying I'd like for us to look into those things as well. So, thanks.
Okay.
Anyone else? That's not me. Mr. Carlin? I know.
Ma'am.
My apologies. Mr. Meek.
Just forget me. One other question I left out earlier. I know they replaced the HVAC system at Berea Elementary, and we had a problem that you're probably not aware of with mold in there for, I think, on 3 different occasions. And I went up a week or so ago and went through, and they were working on the HVAC system. And in the media center where the problem was before, it was noticeably warmer than in adjoining rooms. The principal told me that they were still adjusting the HVAC system. I know the person who was in the media center at the time I was there, they have a couple of humidifiers, and she said that she had to turn those back on. And so if you don't mind following them up on that and checking to make sure that that temperature is regulated correctly in the media center, so we possibly won't have that problem again.
Yes, sir. Sure will.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Carlin, knowing that you have moved into that Summit Lake area, could you please give me an update on the project for the extension of Summit Drive Elementary School? Is that 250 additional seating capacity wing that we're adding, or should I wait and ask that question next meeting? Would you like for me to ask that next time?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the capacity. I can tell you that it's in design right now.
Yes.
And we anticipate being able to take bids in the March timeframe.
Yes, sir.
But as far as the capacity and the extent to which the addition includes, I'm not familiar with it yet.
Okay.
It's right at 250.
Good. Good. Oh, thank you very much. And at this time, that completes Building and Grounds, and I will, before I go any further, I would like to congratulate Dr. Royster for having another birthday, and happy belated birthday. And you made it through another year, so that's a good thing.
Perhaps it was time for another one.
So at this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor, please address by raising your right hand. All opposed? Okay. Please, now, we have a special call meeting, so don't go anywhere. At this time, we have a special call meeting, and where are you going? I'm going to call the meeting to order, and we have items on the agenda. And yes, Ms. Wells.
I'd like to make a motion that we go into executive session for personnel and legal matters. Is that right,
Yes.
Mr. Webb?
One moment. I will not entertain a second at this point. Just a moment, please. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So we're going to call the meeting to order for a special call meeting, and at this time, Ms. Wells.
I'd like to make a motion to go into executive session to discuss personnel recommendations, to receive legal advice pertaining to American Humanist Association versus Greenville County School District, and to discuss data security.
Is there a second? Joy, Ms. Grayson, and all in favor, please address by raising your right hand. All opposed? All right, we will move into executive session at this time. Thank you.
So we have to come back in here and vote?
It's all of the above.
I had it started. I had the beginning of it right.
I guess we need this
I know,
to be
I
a
had
bit
to
more.
take my shoes off so I could get my feet warm.
Session, we took no action.
Got that right.
Taking no action, we will begin with 1.01 personnel recommendations.
Madam Chairman,
Yes, sir. Mr. Lewis.
because I have a family member on the list, I'll need to recuse myself from this vote.
Okay. We have a recommended motion from the administration to approve the personnel recommendations as presented. Do I have a maker?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Okay. Any questions? All in favor, please address by raising your right hand. Okay, everyone except Mr. Lewis. The motion passes. 1.02.
Madam Chairman,
Yes, sir.
you got to take the negatives also.
I'm sorry.
Got to take the vote
All
on
in,
the negative.
all opposed, raise your right hand. None, it passed. Thank you. The majority had already voted, sir. Thank you. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
bringing that to my attention.
You're welcome.
After 9 hours, it's been fun. We did not take any action in executive session, but I will entertain a motion in reference to July 18, 2019 District Court ruling in American Humanist Association versus Greenville County School District. Do I have any discussion? Mr. Shamley? Okay, so the motion, Mr. Shamley, is to move to authorize and direct the administration to take legal action to challenge in whole or in part the court order and injunction issued on July 18th, 2019 in American Humanist Association versus Greenville County School District. Sherry, did you get that? Okay. I need a second.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Morrison Fair. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor, please raise your right hand. All opposed? The motion has carried.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
Matt Shea, for the record, Chuck Saylor's asked that he be recorded as having voted in favor.
Yes, but he is not here, so his vote will not count, but thank you for putting that on in the minutes. 1.03, legal briefing regarding the sharing of student data.
Thank you,
There was no information, there's nothing voted on. Dr. Royster, would you like to add anything to this in reference to legal briefing regarding the sharing of student data?
No.
Okay, at this time, there is no information. I would,
Madam Chairman,
yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
move to adjourn.
There's a motion to adjourn, and there is a second with Dr. Crystal Ball O'Connor. All in favor, please address by raising your right hand. All opposed? I can honestly say at 5:38, we are adjourned. Thank you so much for my first meeting. Thank you.
About time.
Woo-hoo, way to go.